We're going to bring in Connor Rodgers, Bleacher Report's draft analyst, here to give us the lowdown on what's about to happen in Las Vegas over the next 3 days. Connor, how we doing?
Good, Ryan. What's going on, man? How are you?
Are you in Vegas?
I am not in Vegas. We will be doing our coverage out of our New York City studio this year, so it'll be a little calmer on my end of things.
A little calmer, yes. No chance of falling into the Bellagio fountains, as we believe that it's going to happen at some point, either by accident or a big offensive lineman is just going to grab Roger Goodell and say, hey, we're going in.
Yeah, I think this is best for everybody on our Bleacher Report team to cover every pick live on the spot. We'll be a little bit more efficient this way.
I like it. All right. Night before, any bombshells that are about to come out that have become part of the NFL draft stigma?
Man, what I'm fascinated by right now is the divide at the top two picks. And I know that sounds cliche, but I just can't remember a time. We're about 24 hours out from the draft where the number one pick, people truly don't know. A lot of people think Trayvon Walker. A lot of people think that's the direction General Manager Trent Baalke wants to go. But I do think there's some divide in that building. I do think there are people that lean Aiden Hutchinson. And then you go to the number two pick, and the conversation is not that different, but it seems to lean more between some people really like Aiden Hutchinson if he's there. Even if he is there, some people really like Kayvon Thibodeaux, not Trayvon Walker. So I am fascinated by that dynamic, Ryan, that there is a small chance that we can have this thing flipped completely upside down, that the first two picks could go Trayvon Walker and then Kayvon Thibodeaux, with a shocker that Aiden Hutchinson, it's a small chance, but Aiden Hutchinson could be on the board at 3. That would be crazy.
That would be crazy, But what it's showcased is that the NFL and the draft-needy teams at the top are all believing that a edge rusher is a game changer for them, and there honestly could be 3 guys to go in the top 3 that are going to rush the passer this year.
That's exactly right. If you don't, even if you do have the quarterback, or even if you don't, you got to get after the quarterback. You got to impact the quarterback. And the strengths of this draft class are very simple. It's the guys that make life miserable for the quarterback that we just discussed, and it's the guys that keep the quarterback upright on the offensive line with Evan Neal, Ike Ekwonu, and Charles Cross that are all going to go probably within the top 7 picks of this draft. So that's the theme right there. It's the trenches. Maybe it's not the most glamorous thing to the viewers and fans, but that's the reality of this draft, and it's going to help a lot of teams for a long time.
We're speaking with Connor Rodgers, Bleacher Report draft analyst. We're going to have Kayvon Thibodeaux on the show here in about an hour and a half or so, and you just mentioned him a little bit ago. He was the presumptive number 1 overall pick when the season started in college football. He went through some injuries, and then there's been a bit of an offseason during the draft process where some pundits and some analysts have talked about his lack of effort and whether he places football at the very top of his list. But you really see him maybe as a chance of going to number 2 if it plays out that way. Where does Kayvon sit, and what kind of impact can he have on the NFL after everything that's gone on this offseason and the injury that took a hold this college football season?
He could have a huge impact. There's no doubt about that. He's not on the level of some guys we're accustomed to seeing at the top, like Myles Garrett. I know obviously you're going to have Chase Young today. He's not one of those guys. I think that would be an unfair stratosphere to put him in, even Nick Bosa level. But can he be a Brian Burns kind of player? I really think he can. And does he have a lot of ceiling to tap into to develop? He really wins with speed to power and speed to the outside corner. If you start to coach up his hand usage, develop an array of pass rush moves and a pass rush plan, which I believe an NFL staff will do, you can have a really, really high-end rusher. And that's why it starts for him at pick number 2. It is fascinating. He has not been in the conversation for pick number 1 at all throughout this entire process. And that's kind of the feel you get when you talk team by team with Kayvon Thibodeaux. I mean, for me, it feels like the Lions really like him at 2. And then you get into a conversation that maybe he does slide. Maybe it's an Atlanta or a Seattle or a team that trades up when they see him fall out of the first 4 or 5 picks. And that might be less about Kayvon Thibodeaux and more that just teams love Aiden Hutchinson. Surprisingly, they love Trayvon Walker despite the lack of production, and they really, really like the offensive line class. So Kayvon Thibodeaux, it feels like he's been over-scrutinized a little bit, but he's still a top 10 pick, and he still has the most upside of any defensive lineman in this entire draft.
the wide receiver position became the second highest percentage of cap value on teams this year, right? It used to be offensive linemen, like you talked about, left tackles, defensive ends, rushers, and the quarterback, right? Those three things. The wide receiver has jumped into that spot. There is a real chance that in the top 10 picks, it doesn't go to any player that necessarily handles the football predominantly, quarterback or wide receiver. Would that shock you, or are there teams that ultimately have that fear of missing out on a make or break player higher like that ultimately is one of those two positions does creep up into the top 10?
I think it's a great question because there's such a fine balance. I don't see one going in the top 7 picks. But then when you get to Atlanta at 8, they desperately need a wide receiver. They need a lot of things, so it's not a lock they take one, but they desperately need a wide receiver. I think Seattle would answer the phone if a team wants to come up and they prioritize a speedster like Jamison Williams. The Jets at 10, everybody knows they're in on the wide receiver market if they can't swing a trade within these 24 hours for a guy like Deebo Samuel. Washington at 11, they're in on the wide receiver market as well. Houston at 13, the Eagles at 15, the Saints at 16. That's a lot of teams in a really tight window that are all over the wide receiver class this year. And it just makes you wonder if that turns up the heat, turns up the pressure on the Packers at 22, the Chiefs at 29. The Chiefs have a ton of picks in this class, Ryan. They're not going to use them all. They're going to play the board. They're going to be aggressive. Now, maybe they go up. They still need help in the secondary as well. So it's not a lock they're looking at wide receiver. And even the Cowboys at 24. We know Jerry Jones. He would have no problem taking another wide receiver. So I think there's going to be a run. It's just a matter of when you could blink and miss it. And when it starts, probably at 8, potentially at 10, it's all going to happen really fast for those top 5 in this class.
Now, you talked about some of those teams that are in need of a receiver, but what they're also in need of is a quarterback. And that's been a big conversation piece this whole offseason, whether this class could live up to anything and which quarterback's going to go where and how. The two names that predominantly continue to be talked about or batted about in the first round are Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett. Night before the draft, can you gauge kind of the interest level? Are there going to be teams that want to move up to try to get them, or do they feel like they can stay in their spot a la New England and get the guy they want later in the round?
Yeah, that's the big one, right? When you look at it, it starts with the Panthers at 6. I think they're the team that everybody's looking at and going, are they really going to take a quarterback at 6, or are they going to try to play this, maybe take a tackle, or if they don't get the tackle they want, move back and still take Pickett? The Steelers go the other way. Are they going to move up from 20 to take Malik Willis? And everybody's kind of looking around wondering, well, who's in their way, right? Who's in the way of the Panthers to get Kenny Pickett if they move back? Who's in the way of the Steelers getting Malik Willis at 20? And while it doesn't seem like there's a lot of obvious candidates, when you hear so much noise that Atlanta's not really desperate for a quarterback right now, they're willing to use the bridge option with Marcus Mariota and maybe kick the can down the road next year. Seattle's the one that surprises me. They're picking in the top 10. Maybe they just don't like this quarterback class. But when you're rolling into the season with Drew Lock, I don't know how much upside is really there. And then quietly, the one that I think both of these teams are very afraid of is the New Orleans Saints. Now that they have that other first-round pick, they can solve their need at left tackle or get a wide receiver, and they can still use that other selection on a quarterback to sit behind Jameis Winston. I know he has a lot of guaranteed money within this year, but that would be a draft pick for the next 2 to 3 years, not for the next 6 months. So everybody's kind of on this stare down of when can we get Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett. And then after that, obviously, we know this quarterback class is not the best we've seen recently.
All right. The other big news, of course, that's been on the tongues of everybody in the NFL is when Deebo Samuel spoke up about wanting a new contract. If not, he wanted out of San Francisco to be compensated. Are there real players involved? We heard John Lynch this week say, hey, he's too good of a player. We're not going to trade him. We know what we have here. We want to make it work. But is there really a team out there, a la you talked about the New York Jets trying to make a play with the draft picks that they have, the capital that they have? San Francisco, of course, gave away a lot of that capital to move up and get Trey Lance a year ago. Where does the trade climate sound or feel with Deebo Samuel heading into the draft tomorrow night?
They just have to be willing to move him, and I don't know if teams will cave to their price. It sounds like they do not want to move him, but he's dug in, and it sounds like Deebo Samuel is not going to come back to play for the Niners. So if you're them in the next 36 hours, you need to figure out if he's really not coming back, we need to get assets for this year to help Trey Lance for next season. We can't let this go into the summer, trade him over the summer, have 2023 picks, and then we don't have those players on the roster to work with a quarterback that'll essentially be playing his rookie season. So this is a dicey situation for the 49ers. Now, when you look at the external market of who would be involved, yes, as I said, the Jets would have to be at the forefront of this. They've made it clear. They've shown their cards. They're all in on getting a superstar veteran wide receiver when the opportunity comes up. They haven't been able to close the deal. They couldn't get Tyreek Hill. They were ready to pay him $25 million a year. They're ready to trade those day 2 selections to get him. We have not seen that Joe Douglas is willing to trade a top 10 pick for a wide receiver just to pay him $25 million a year. That's where it's going to be really interesting. Could be a bit of a stare down. I would never rule out the Eagles. We know they need a wide receiver. We know Howie Roseman's very, very aggressive. They have a ton of draft capital over the next 3 years, but they might want to spread out that draft capital, not sink a ton of it into a guy they have to pay. And then you have to wonder, is there a wild card out there, right? Is there a Baltimore Ravens that would love to get a dynamic weapon to help Lamar Jackson, a team like that? But I think when it's said and done, there's a relationship between the Jets and the 49ers. The Niners are going to have to, at some point, admit that Deebo Samuel is not coming back to play for them, especially at whatever price they deemed they're willing to keep him on, and the Jets have the draft capital to do it. The biggest question is if they're willing to send that number 10 pick and if the Niners decide to pick up the phone in the next 24 hours.
We're talking with Connor Rodgers, Bleacher Report lead draft analyst. I have a theory around what we've seen in terms of the market this year, especially at the wide receiver position. And when you have a chance to get one in the first round and have those 5 years before the big deal that they want moves forward, right? I mean, Deebo Samuel's throwing it into the wind here after your third year and wanting an extension because of the success there. This scenario where you move Devontae Adams to the Raiders, you move Tyreek Hill to Miami, both of those situations, you have future Hall of Fame quarterbacks in that position, right? The staffs feel like they can make whoever they have on the roster better. The two places where they landed are situational places with Derek Carr and Tua Tagovailoa, where they're still, in the eyes of a lot of people, a work in progress. Where do you see this wide receiver market going? Because that is a lot of money to invest in a position that doesn't necessarily have a say in when they get the football. And that's a lot of capital, especially percentage-wise of the cap, to invest in that.
It's really dicey, and it's really dicey for certain reasons. One, the fact is a lot of these guys have the same representation, right? For A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, whatever one gets paid first, the next one gets paid more, and the next one gets paid more. And truthfully, I don't see these guys showing up to training camp until that's done. Now, that's an assumption, not knowledge, but it just makes sense when you check that out. And, Ryan, I think you nailed it. It's so quarterback, situationally based, right? When you look at Washington, I don't think they're going to let Terry McLaurin go because how would that help Carson Wentz, right? Same with the Titans with A.J. Brown. They're going to try to keep A.J. Brown because he helps Ryan Tannehill. Now, when you look at the Niners, they feel like Pat Mahomes and Andy Reid can elevate the receivers around them, and they went with the volume route. They got Valdez-Scantling, they got Juju Smith-Schuster, and they're going to draft the guy as well. So now they have multiple targets instead of one super incredibly game-changing target, and, obviously Tyreek Hill with his speed. They're going to spread things out a little bit. So it's so based on situation. And then the other thing is you need a market. I think if the Jets got a guy and paid him $25 million a year or whatever it may be, that takes the biggest player off the table, that there's not going to be as many desperate teams that have that kind of open cap space to do it. So when there's an external team lurking, the agents know that, and that's how we get to a situation that we're seeing with Deebo Samuel. That just won't always be the case every single year.
Yeah, it's become really interesting. I'm right with you, Connor, in terms of who you draft, who you pay in free agency. It's the guy that passes the ball, the guy that protects the guy that passes, and the guy that rushes the guy that passes. Everything else I feel like you can find differently. And the guys you talked about, the wide receivers that you're talking about that are looking for those big deals now, all taken after round one, right? You can go find them. You just have to be prepared for hitting it right and them wanting a big deal after 3 years, because it's going to be a big part of what that. I mean, you got to compliment the guy that finds the diamond in the rough in the third, fourth, or maybe second round of a wide receiver who plays at the top level. But it could turn around to bite you if they're that good.
That's exactly right, and it's the hit rate, right? The hit rate on tackles and pass rushers outside round one is not the same as it is on wide receiver. Now, whether, certain teams believe in that or not, but that's just the facts right now. And that's why you're going to see, like we opened the show with, right? The tackles and rushers really dominate the top 6 picks of this draft. And then the wide receivers come in the middle of the round, and even more of them really come off the board, obviously, in the 2nd and 3rd rounds and get a chance to start more often than not. So that's just the reality of the NFL. That's how a lot of evaluators view it. And that's, something that as much as these guys are resetting the market and getting mega deals, I don't know if it will be as consistent of a trend as we see with the pass rushers and the quarterbacks, of course, who will always dominate the market.
Yes, they will. Connor Rodgers, everybody, Bleacher Report, lead draft analyst. Thanks so much for taking the time. You are locked in, man. I loved it. Appreciate your time.
Ryan, always great talking to you. Thanks for having me, man.
You bet. Connor Rodgers, everybody.
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.